Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the FuturePedsRes Webinar for the 2024 match cycle. If you're with us for the first time, welcome. If you were at the kickoff event last week, thank you for joining us again. We've got a lot of great things coming. My name is Estelle Green. My pronouns are she, her. I am a fourth-year medical student at the Penn State College of Medicine in the University Park curriculum located in the Happy Valley of State College, Pennsylvania. I am serving as one of the co-directors for FuturePedsRes this year.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Geico. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently a fourth-year medical student at Virginia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Blacksburg, Virginia, and I am serving as your other co-director for FuturePedsRes this year. We want to remind you that we will be having our IMG webinar this upcoming Monday, July 10th, and our regional webinars featuring residency programs from across the country are coming throughout August and September. You can use the QR link on this page right here with your phone, and it will bring you up to the registration link that will allow you to register for all of our future webinars. We will also be dropping the link in the chat.
And before we start, we would like to acknowledge our APPD faculty advisor, Dr. Michael Dell, who's also the Vice Chair of Education at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, as well as Colin Hughes, who serves as the Associate Executive Director for APPD. We would also like to acknowledge our Concept faculty advisor, Dr. Rachel Thompson, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics and Director of Pediatric Undergraduate Medical Education at the Boston University Trowbridge Avedisian School of Medicine. And a big thank you to the outgoing APPD faculty advisor as well, Dr. John Frona. These individuals have made tonight possible, and we're grateful for their support.
It is now my pleasure to introduce you all to the Assistant Director of Equity for DO applicants, Allison Hill. Her pronouns are she, her. Allison is a fourth-year osteopathic medical student at Oklahoma State College of Osteopathic Medicine. She was born and raised in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and is the first in her family to pursue a career in medicine. And also our Associate Director of Equity, Kiana Herdizia. Her pronouns are she, her. Kiana is a fourth-year medical student at the Robert Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. She was born and raised in the Hudson Valley area in New York and is also the first in her family to pursue a career in medicine.
We would also like to introduce our FPR webinar team working hard behind the scenes tonight, Sheena and Nicole. And now let's delve into our goals for the night.
Our objective for tonight's DO session are to provide DO residency applicants with tools to empower DOs throughout the match cycle for the 2024 year, advice on finding mentors and sponsors to help navigate through the joint DO-MD world, and recommendations on how to avoid major pitfalls.
So next, we will be moving into the panel part of the evening. We have our wonderful program directors here to share some advice for applicants and answer your much anticipated questions. We'll jump right into the introductions and then move on to our Q&A session. We have prepared 4 questions for the panelists, and then we'll take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please tweet it and add the hashtag FPR webinar, or you can drop it in the chat section on the Zoom, which can be found on your Zoom toolbar.
And now the moment you've all been waiting for. On behalf of FuturePedsRes, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists for tonight. Dr. Laura Bodie is a clinical associate professor of pediatrics at Oklahoma State University Center for Health Science and program director of the Osteopathic Medical Education Consortium of Oklahoma Pediatrics Residency. We also have Dr. Tyree Winters, who is a pediatric residency program director at Atlantic Health Goriab Children's Hospital. He completed his medical education at Ohio University College of Osteopathic Medicine and went on to complete his residency at Nationwide Children's Hospital. He has dedicated much of his career to underserved children, and particularly children with obesity. Dr. Joanna Lewis is a pediatric residency program director at Advocate Children's Hospital in Park Ridge, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. She has been in the role for 10 years and also sits on the APPD Recruitment Action Committee. Her clinical focus is general pediatrics and school health, and her research focus is on innovations in medical education with a recent focus on the X+Y scheduling. She graduated with an MD degree from Chicago Medical School and is proud to run a program with a great mix of DO and MD residents that go on to pursue both general pediatrics and pediatric subspecialty careers. And Dr. Lynn Thorson, who is a graduate of ASCOM, she completed her residency training and a chief year in pediatrics at the University of Texas at Austin Dell Medical School, where she continues to practice pediatric hospital medicine. She works in graduate medical education as the Director of Pediatric Fellowships, Fellowship Director for Pediatric Hospital Medicine, and Director of GME Accreditation.
So thank you all so much for being here tonight. And without further ado, let's get started on the Q&A portion of tonight's webinar. So for our first question, we'll direct this at Dr. Bodie, and anyone else feel free to chime in for the panelist, please. How do you identify programs that are DO friendly?
Oh, that's a good question. It's kind of hard, and I think it's probably hard until you're into that interview process. I would say kind of get to know yourself and look at all the programs that you're interested in, and maybe look out in some things that maybe you haven't really thought about before too. Look into their websites and their social media, and try to get to know them. If you're looking at a large program, maybe you can see like the class composite of those large programs, and you could see if there's any other DO residents or DO faculty members. But with those smaller and medium programs, that might not be very representative, because it's just a kind of a 3-year picture. So definitely in your interviews, ask questions that are important to you as a DO and try to judge their answers, because they want to hear your questions and be able to answer your questions just as much as they want to answer your questions. So.
Thank you, Dr. Bodie. That was fantastic. For our second question, we'll direct this at Dr. Winters. The question is, how many programs should DOs apply to this cycle, and what factors should an applicant consider when creating their ERAS list?
Great question. And so actually, if you look at the current stats that are out there in regards of the average USMD candidate versus the average USDO candidate that are applying to residency programs, is actually not that far off. So usually the average student who doesn't really have any specific barriers that are in place that they would feel as if would be depending on their application, typically would apply to about 25 to 30 different programs, which is the roughly around the average. For USMD, it's usually between 20 and 25. So you see, it's really not that far off. In regards, though, when you're thinking about really applying, I always say the first and foremost thing is to really consider what are important to you. So very similar to what Dr. Bodie had said before, it's like really being able to list out what are kind of your own specific values that you have placed within that for a program. Location is definitely something that is always important, but also things such as looking at curriculum, looking at whether or not there is a support system that's in place. Wellness is something that's huge, not only for the ACGME, but also among resident and student groups as well, which it should be. You really have to consider that as a factor. But when you're thinking about creating your ERAS list, I think the most important thing is to really do more of a deeper dive. It's one thing to have DOs or faculty DOs, residents, but it's another thing to really embody what's important to you. I know when I was applying for residency, and what I actually talk a lot about with candidates as they are coming past during the interview season is things such as continuing on your education, your full education. So as a DO, I'm very proud of my OMM and my OMM skills that I'm able to use, and I actually incorporate that it's actually one of the things that I brought when I had came to my residency program, is to actually start an ORMM curriculum at my program that both allopathic and osteopathic residents would go through. So it's things like that that really highlights whether or not, when you're thinking about your full scope of practice, are you being able to see? And it doesn't necessarily mean that the program has to have an ORMM curriculum, right? But ORMM may not be something that's high up on your list, but what are those things that are important? And that's what I would say are factors that I would really consider in creating my list for URES.
Very insightful. Thank you so much for all of that insight.
Can I say one other thing I wanted to add on to what Ty said? So I always agree with Ty. So I agree with everything he said and with Laura, but I think the other thing, excuse me, to keep in mind is you really need to think about how many interviews you're going to do. So that's what should also be driving how many programs you apply to. So I hear a lot, we've heard since people went to virtual interviews, that all of a sudden it gives you as an applicant this opportunity to do so many more interviews. I think that's still a bad idea. I think that still, I really tell people doing more than 2 interview days in a week is a lot, whether you're traveling or not. First of all, we don't want you to miss that much clinical time on your rotations, but also you really start to forget things about the day and the program. So you'll be, for us, my program, we don't do more than 2 interview days ourselves in a week, because you'll find you're talking to a faculty member and you think, oh gosh, did I already answer this question? Did I already ask them this? Was that this person? Was that the last person? It's still very exhausting. So we know that the rate of return for matching in pediatrics really sort of is maximized at doing around 12 or 13 interviews. So that's also why we're not recommending that you do 5 times that amount of applying. You have to think of sort of what your percent yield is going to be from your interviews, but you're not, most people are not going to do 20 interviews in an interview season. Even if you feel like the world is your oyster, you can travel to any city and be rural or urban or anything, you're going to want to pare that down a little bit. So that does go into how many programs you're applying to.
I'll just say quickly also, that APPD put out a recommendation that most people don't need to apply to more than 20 programs in an interview year, unless they have, some academic difficulties, those in the couples match, or if your medical school advisor is advising you to do so. About 20 is kind of that spot. In the last several years, our DO applicants have been much more successful in the match. And so I think that those numbers that have been out there before are a little outdated, and maybe our DO applicants wouldn't need to do as much as was previously recommended.
Thank you, Dr. Bodie and Dr. Lewis, for those really nice nuggets of wisdom as well. We can go ahead and move on to our 3rd question, which will be directed at Dr. Lewis. With level and step 1 moving to pass fail, how differently will level 1 and step 2 be viewed?
Sure, I'm happy to answer this. I'll tell you that in pediatrics, for many of us, we were already looking at level 1 and step 1 as pass fail for many years. So we knew it was coming. So in my program, it's probably been about 4 years that we've been viewing everything as pass fail. So, but for some programs, it will be new that this is something different. We had some exposure to it last year. I think it will probably by default make a little bit more of a difference of what you get on level 2 or step 2, but I have always thought that test was important anyway. So I'm not sure that it's making it so much more important. I think it always, if you failed level 1 or step 1 and then passed, people are going to really want to see a little bit more what your level 2 or step 2 is, just to show how you sort of rebound from something that was challenging, what you've learned from that experience, and what your test taking skills are. But I did have a student just ask me on Wednesday, I met with a student who said, they were told that if they didn't take the test by now, then they wouldn't have their results and they wouldn't get an interview. And I would tend to disagree with that sentiment. I think for many programs, I can only speak 100% on behalf of mine, but most people will want to know that you've passed step 2 by the time they rank you, because if you don't pass step 2, we can't be sure that you're going to graduate. And we want to start the number of people that we match. And so they will want to see that by the time you are ranked, we usually ask for it by February 1st or something if we don't have it. But I'm not sure how much it's weighing into people's initial interview offers, since we really are trying to look at the full picture of an application and not just the test scores. I know you didn't ask me this, but I would take a minute here, if you don't mind, to just the eminent question about COMLEX versus USMLE. So they're both tests. Tests are just tests. We have to take them forever. I am hopeful that most people know that there's not a reason that you need to take both. And if you haven't taken USMLE step 1, then I wouldn't bother taking step. It's more money. I don't know. I think they both can show how you do with your work. So personally, I don't find a need for a DO student to have taken USMLE.
Can I add to that? Again, obviously, Dr. Lewis, I just agree with everything that she says. And I can't lie to you, I've been someone who has been a very staunch advocate of not taking USMLE, a test that is not required for you to graduate with your DO degree. However, I will be remiss if I did not say that there will be some programs, unfortunately, that's out there that still do have that kind of bias that they really do like to see USMLE scores. And so I don't want to give you this false pretense as if, oh yeah, everybody has this very basic understanding of what it means to have. But I always say this, and this was advice that was given to me by my mentor, and I have held on to this forevermore. If they don't want your board scores, if they don't want your boards, they don't want your degree. And so I'm a firm believer in, as someone who is a proud descendant of many, many historically Black colleges and university graduates, it just brings to memory again of something that I was told over and over again by family members who went to Howard, where it's always a Howard and never a Harvard type of situation. You have to remember your degree is just as valuable as anyone else's degree. Your boards are just as valuable as any other boards. And so it may, when you have that philosophy, I will tell you this, there may be times where it just may not be that program for you at that particular time. But rest assured, there are 211 so far programs, and there are hundreds of programs that still will take your boards, still value your degree. So don't let that persuade you or stop you.
The other thing I wanted to add, the one thing I find to be odd that gives me pause is if a DO student only sends their USMLE, sometimes we wonder if they're only sending their USMLE for a reason, because we know you have to take the COMLEX. So it doesn't happen that often, but there are some times when I think, and I know you need your COMLEX to graduate. So I would say either you need to explain why you haven't submitted your COMLEX, but it's a handful of times, but it's still enough that it came in my head. And I've never had a single, I don't know about you guys, but in my program, I've never had a single DO take USMLE step 3. Everybody just takes COMLEX step level 3 once you get to residency. And we have a lot of DOs in our program.
Thank you both for your candid nature. That was very insightful, very helpful for us. So we can move on to our last question, and this is open to any of the panelists. Feel free to chime in. What is the best piece of advice you have for an osteopathic applicant?
I guess I'll start. Oh, to add to the, sorry, before I answer this question, I would say to add to the first question, how do you find DO-friendly programs? I would say the other thing you can consider is states that have osteopathic schools that also have training programs likely have run into osteopathic students, probably trained them, have an environment that is very friendly to osteopathic students. So that is one thing to consider is I think most of those states, we have osteopathic students all the time from TCOM, and everyone at our program is very used to that being one of those schools, just like any other medical school, which I think leads into my advice to sort of highlight what Joanna and Ty said is be a pediatric applicant. Like from now forward, you are a medical doctor. You did the same coursework as anyone that went to an allopathic school. In fact, I always looked at it as you actually did additional coursework because you did OMM. And you come from the same clinical background as any other medical student. So you are a medical student. I rarely, if ever, remember that I'm a DO or think about the difference. In some ways, I feel like my training was more representative of taking care of patients because the focus at our school was really how you took care of a person that had an illness and not how you took care of a disease. And so I would say in practice, our osteopathic applicants tend to do much better clinically than many of our allopathic applicants because they've had much more one-on-one mentoring with physicians, and there's a lot of focus on communication. So particularly in pediatrics, like you have excellent training. So I personally tell people to not worry about it. Like Dr. Winters mentioned, you will sometimes encounter people that still have some bias or held theories about osteopathic applicants. It is probably not someone you want to train with, or you have the opportunity to show them why you are an excellent physician, honestly. Like I don't feel like it has ever held me back in my career. I don't really think about it most days, truthfully, except to know that I had excellent training. I think the one thing that you probably will get asked on interviews, because most osteopathic schools have clinical rotations that tend to be more one-on-one focused than necessarily in teaching settings. And because particularly intern year, most of your focus right now is much more hospital-based and sort of a traditional academic structure, they will ask you sort of what experiences have you had in pediatrics training, particularly inpatient pediatric training. And it's, if you haven't had much, it's okay. Just reflect on what your pediatric training has been. But if you've had extra sort of team-based pediatric training where you rounded on a team in a hospital, it helps them to know that. There are advantages to both levels of training and both types of training. And it's just larger academic centers tend to focus a little bit more on what we consider traditional teaching rounds. And so they like to know that you've had some experience with that. If it hasn't been in pediatrics, great. It can be in internal medicine or whatever setting you were in. But otherwise, just put your best self forward. Congratulations, you're a doctor and you are eligible for this training just like everyone else. And you have the same strengths to put forward as every other candidate. And so I say forget the DO part or show them how great your training was. And then everyone will remember you're a DO, which is kind of how I always approached it. I don't know how Ty and Laura felt about it, but I was always really proud to be a DO. And I feel like through our careers, we've shown people why perhaps we're better than everyone else. I don't know.
I mean, I completely agree. You really should know your worth and your strength in that DO degree, and your training and experiences are going to make you a great pediatrician. I mean, pediatricians really know the importance of a holistic provider. Like we advocate for not just our patients' health, but their mind and their spirit every day, all day. And that's what your med school training has been teaching you and your clinical experiences. And so that's a strength for you. If you see that as a strength for yourself, make sure that you advertise it in your interviews and your personal statements. I want you to be proud to be a DO because they make great pediatricians. Absolutely.
Can I say one last thing about that too? And I agree with both Lynn and Laura so much on this topic. But one thing that I will say that Lynn hit that I think is important to also know, because of the fact the majority of our faculty in osteopathic schools are volunteer and may be excellent clinicians, but may not be as well versed in a lot of academia and the way that certain things are done, or that ways people want to see. Really take a look at, and you can do this, you can take a look at your MSPE, which is your medical student performance evaluation, and look and see what was written down for your rotations, because sometimes the narrative that's written may be blank or may not really truly reflect the experience that you had. And that really can sometimes be that kind of dividing line when one is trying to pick one candidate over another. If they really get a chance to take a look and see like someone else's narratives may be very verbose and very descriptive of that student versus the other one, it's kind of a little bit vague, then you may tend to go with the one who you can read up on and know what their clerkship comments were. You can always go back to your clerkship, or even talk to your clerkship directors when you're finishing off in the rotations, when you're doing your mid block or your end of the block rotations, and just say like, hey, jotting down notes to yourself with a specific patient or specific experience that you had that you really think you would like to see highlighted in your medical student performance evaluation, just saying like, hey, I just want to reflect back on this situation that we had. And I thought that, it was really representative of the experience that we had. That can help in two ways, because one, it can help the clerkship director, I can tell you as being a former clerkship director, to be able to write down your evaluation, a narrative for your evaluation, but it also allows for you to be able to make sure your MSPE is more reflective of your experience that you had, regardless if it's inpatient or outpatient.
Yeah, I think to highlight that, the other place that comes across sometimes is the evaluation letters that you receive, particularly from community pediatricians. The letters often have very rich information, because you can tell that the person has worked one-on-one with the student. And that sometimes doesn't happen if you're in a larger team setting. You may see the attendee in a couple of days or not necessarily have as much interaction with them. But sometimes the letters, just in terms of format, can look a little bit different than some of the letters that come from an academic center. And they definitely don't have the sort of excess titles that many of us in academic centers have. And so it helps to have a mix. I was just, Ty, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, we probably could certainly help our DO colleagues out there who are working with students and give them a better format for their letters. Because it really is just formatting. So it does help to have a little bit of a mix if you can. If you can't, it's okay. But certainly sometimes the letters that come from community preceptors look a little bit different. And it takes us reviewing them in a holistic way, as we're supposed to really read the information in those letters. For programs that are letter scanners, they often will just stop on the ones from programs where they know people instead of actually reading the letter. So it helps to think through who writes your letters and the combination of letters that you have, if that's possible.
Thank you, everyone, so much for all of those, nuggets of wisdom. That was fantastic. I guess for our last part of the Q&A session, we'll open up the questions to our participants. And so the first question that we actually had is, how do we stand out as applicants prior to interviews if we didn't do an audition rotation? And I can go ahead and put that in the chat as well for you all.
So I can start. First of all, I just want to say everything's going to be fine. Okay. that is the overall thing. It goes back to what Ty said, like there's 200 something pediatric programs, right? And we're pediatricians, like we're nice people. We review their whole application. We want to talk to you. So I think people think that there's all this gaming of the system that happens and with all this different stuff, but really, first of all, just everything's going to be fine. I would tell anyone like that I would be thrilled if they went to Laura's program or Lynn's program or Ty's program. Like it's just a love fest in peds. I mean, we all love each other. We love each other's programs. And what we're all looking for is someone for whom our program is the right fit. So that's why it's about this introspection that we've been talking about this whole time, is looking at what's the right place for you. That being said, in terms of audition rotations, we know that you can't do that many, right? I mean, that many medical schools, some medical schools don't allow it. We know that sometimes it's very limited how much pediatrics you can do versus how many other requirements you have. We also, as a group in peds, recognize that being able to travel and find somewhere else to live and pay these different fees is not equal opportunity, that everybody cannot do that, whether that is monetarily, whether it's because they're caring for their family, whether it's because who knows, they have any other myriad things going on. So that's why I don't even like to call them an audition rotation. I like to just call them an away rotation. So doing an away rotation allows you an opportunity to see a program. And yes, it does allow a program to see you, but I find it to be nice if someone can rotate with us, but I certainly don't hold it against anyone if they cannot. And I think that we all are working really hard within the peds community to understand that. And it is really just one piece of the whole puzzle of your application.
I think you can
Awesome.
stand out just by shining your personality through your personal statement, and hopefully you've received some good letters of recommendation because you've been working hard in all your clinical rotations, and that will really help your application stand out. And then the other thing that we haven't really talked about, but is like with the supplemental application, using your signals wisely for the programs that you really want to connect with, that are on the top of your list that you think that you will be a great fit at, to use those as well.
Excellent. And we've had a couple questions actually about the flip side of that question. If you all don't mind to speak a little bit on, if you have an opportunity to do an away rotation, how can you stand out? How can you show programs that you're interested in?
Oh, Lynn, you want to go?
Oh, go. I think I just be present and interested and engaged. You know, professionalism is like rule number one for all of us. And so showing up on time, being prepared, staying engaged in rounds or whatever activity you're on. If you are on, depending on what rotation you're doing, you know, if you're doing a subspecialty, attending conferences or resident conferences and participating is very helpful. If you have an opportunity, meet with the chief residents and just ask some questions about the program. I will say, I don't know if this applies to the other programs here, but for our program, the residents have a lot of say about how sub-Is performed and did on the rotation. And so I ask advice of your senior resident, ask them for feedback. Don't ask them for too much feedback. There's definitely a version of like, if you're asking for feedback every day or every 5 minutes, they're going to be like, whoa, it's too much. But, you know, once a week is appropriate. Let them know your goals of the rotation and how you can best help, and just be open to people making suggestions. But I think if you're present and put in an effort, people recognize that, and it goes a long way. It's a cool place to be part of a team. If you happen to be on the rotation where you're the only resident, ask the faculty members like, hey, where can I find the residents, or seek out some of the residents so they know you're there, and just be engaged in some of the activities they have available for education so that they meet you and see you.
Sometimes you also have an opportunity to help the third year students when you're a fourth year. If that seems appropriate, that really can show that you have leadership potential, that you're interested in teaching and supervision. So that sometimes can make a difference. It depends on the clinical setting, but if you're on an inpatient floor and you're the fourth year sub-I or AI or whatever you call them, there's third year med students and you can help them. That's also, it's just a nice thing to do in like the karma of the world, but it also does show on your rotation that you are helpful and you're interested in leading and teaching.
One thing that I would tell you is, God honest, the one student that always sticks into my mind, and I've had this conversation with so many different faculty members, is the one student that understands their role as physician. And so what I mean by that is when we talk a lot, like when Lynn talked a lot about showing up, being active there, really having the mindset that if no one else was here and I was the only one who could take care of this patient, what would I do? That would dictate a lot of things that you would do. It would really help you to have that understanding like, oh, let me have this intellectual curiosity to read up on this. Let me think about what a plan B would be. Let me go and look at articles that pertain to this. And when I see that, I don't really care what someone's level of knowledge coming into the residency is, because I always know everybody's going to have different levels. But what I have a hard time being able to try to engage is someone to have intellectual curiosity, someone to have that fervor to want to improve. And when I see that starting out the gate, those are the best sub-Is. Those are the sub-Is that always go top to my list, and I'm fighting for them.
Can we answer the question about the personal statement? I would love to also hear Ty, Laura, and Joanna's thoughts on this, and maybe Michael too, if you have opinion. So number one, think about the fact that most programs will sift through 200 plus applications. And that is a lot of personal statements. So we appreciate brevity. Please keep it to a page. It helps a lot. And like, share a bit of your story, something that you feel like makes you stand out or is a bit different about your background, where you started, why you were interested in medicine. Maybe perhaps something that isn't necessarily highlighted in your other activities. You know, we can see the activities you've highlighted for us, and we know why you volunteered at that summer camp or the other things that involve pediatrics. So try and dig a little bit into something that maybe isn't necessarily another part of your application. It helps us to get to know you as a person. We read a lot of applications from people who are like, I've always loved children, I want to be a teacher. Like that's a pretty common thread across pediatrics, and it's not bad. I think it's important, but if there are parts of your story that you feel comfortable sharing, it helps us know you a little bit more. Certainly, I think most personal statements, don't feel a lot of pressure about them. Most personal statements don't get you an interview. It's your application in general, but personal statements can get you a not interview, particularly if you have spelling errors. I personally do not necessarily enjoy a lot of patient care stories, particularly that go into a lot of detail about patients, because I do feel like that is a version of HIPAA that I don't need to read about. But I'd be interested in how the other panelists feel about that. But we like to hear how you maybe conquered a challenge. Residency's hard. Overcoming challenges or things in your life that have been challenging, help us know how you recovered. If there's any part of your application that you feel like you really struggle with, or step scores or class, like address it in your personal statement. Don't try and hide it in your application or not address it, because if people don't tell us how they've recovered from things that have been challenging, we're not sure you recognize that that was a challenge. And we all have faced challenges. We all will tell you we have a resume of failures that is much longer than our resume of success. What you do with those experiences is what's really important to us. And so we actually, our residents who do the best are people that have faced challenges before and know how to overcome them. And so those are the things we like to see in applications, because then we know that's happened. But I'll let the other panelists say, I feel really strongly about personal statements, probably after reading them for so many years, that there's certain things that tend to, as a reader, make me a little less excited than some other things. So.
I mean, yes, if you had a challenge in medical school or undergrad, or if you think there's some glaring thing on your application, I think it's good to put it in your personal statement, but don't put in your personal statement like, oh, I only got a 500 on COMLEX and now nobody's going to like me type thing. I mean, don't try to find a challenge that's not that much of a challenge, or does that make sense? I think the really important thing is to make a good personal statement is just to know yourself and what excites you about pediatrics and what's going to make you a great resident and what's going to make you a great pediatrician and what you're looking for in a program, and try to summarize all of those things in that statement. And I know that seems like a challenge, but those are the statements that I can read and I say, that person's a great fit. Like, I'll know how they'll interview. I know how they will work as a resident. So try to work on that.
I think one thing I want to say is there's that opportunity now in the application to have that impactful experiences section. So first of all, I wanted to reassure you that we don't expect everyone to have something in that section. There's, I mean, I would say maybe I feel there was something, Rachel, you know this better, like from the AAMC about like what percentage of people they thought would have something in that impactful experiences section. But you don't need to put, if there's something written there, you don't need to write it again in your personal statement, because we're going to read both of those. But I think the more years I've been doing this and looking at these applications and reading them, I really feel like we are at a good place for us and for you in the way we're viewing applications. And that is exactly what Laura said. I think you're going to be most successful if you use the application as a tool to help you figure out what you want. So now you have to have 10 your 10 experiences. As you're choosing what those 10 are, that should be guiding you to what kind of pediatrician you want to be, what kind of program you're looking for, right? Now that we make you narrow these things down. So when you're writing your personal statement, this is really a time for introspection, for thinking about what is it that I'm looking for? What is it that I want? And if you take the time to dig deep and do that thinking, then in your interview, you're going to, again, be your true self. Answer questions aren't going to seem false. You're going to find the right programs for you. Again, we read a lot of them. I'll tell you that somebody that has spelling errors, grammatical errors, it drives me bananas. That it makes me think that you don't care. This is something you could be working on it for months. You know it's due in September. You have the opportunity to have people read it. And if you don't, it's just not putting your best foot forward so that we know you're going to be conscientious. Like, medicine is about being conscientious. And so we want to know that from the outset, that you're able, to like, not grammatical errors necessarily, but spelling errors. Those, all you have to do is run it through a spell check and you should be able to find the correct answer for that. And I really recommend that people have someone outside of medicine read their personal statements. Doctors are not the best writers. It's just not how most people have spent their time. So I think that is a really important thing to do. Get someone else's advice, and don't just have it be like your parents or your partner who, unless you think they can be brutally honest, but find someone who's going to be the most honest with you to edit that with you.
Thank you all very much. If anyone needs to borrow someone brutally honest, I have a couple sisters you can borrow. Another question we've seen in the chat, and actually we had before we came here tonight, was how do we approach programs that seem non-DO friendly, whether that be that they don't have many DOs, they have no DOs. How do we approach that, whether that be through a sub-I or through the official application?
I mean, I think if the program is of interest to you, for whatever reason, usually we know that most people pick programs either because it's close to family, or resources that you have for support, or it happens to be in a part of the country that you want to live. So if the program is of interest to you for a specific reason, and you can really highlight that reason, give it a shot. Definitely don't dismiss them because there's only 1 or 2 faculty, or you don't see DOs on their list. You may be the first person that has an opportunity there, and it's a great opportunity. I think what we suggest is don't have that be your only opportunity. We usually tell students, it's of the 12, 15 to 20 programs you're going to interview or have interest in. It helps to have a little ranking. It's always great to have some programs that seem a little out of your reach, or perhaps you don't know much about, but you're really interested. It helps to have programs that you feel really comfortable with and have a good vibe with. And sometimes it helps to have some programs that maybe are a little smaller or not your perfect match, but for reasons because you have support there, or you like the city, or other people that went there, or whatever the reason is, that feel like a safe place to spend time and energy. It helps to have a mix. And so if one of those programs seems like a real long shot, but you're really interested, go for it. It's always worth the effort if it's really important to you. I would say don't do it just because there's a name. Like, you're like, oh, I have to be at this program because someone told me it was the #1 program in the country. The one thing that ACGME assures of all programs is that we all teach you the same thing. There is no secret to what is in a residency program for pediatrics. We all do it very similarly, except for maybe Joanna and I do it a little bit different because we like innovation. We can talk about that in another one. But all programs are teaching you the same thing. There's a little bit of variation to it, but you will get very similar experiences in most places. The part that's different is the culture, and that part's important. So don't pick it just because it's a name, because that name might not hold up for what you want. I agree with what Dr. Winter said earlier. It's a match. You should want the program as much as a program wants you. We definitely look for people that match to what our program can offer in terms of interest and experience. We certainly, especially because we're in Texas, realize that we are maybe not everyone's #1 choice for a place to live. And so, with people that are coming from different parts of the country, it helps to have a little bit of a, here's why I'm interested in coming to Texas kind of discussion, because we do sometimes wonder why someone would want to move from another state to Texas, given our current political climate. And so those things are important to programs, but it is a match. And so don't feel like you're the one that has to convince the programs. The programs also have to do a little convincing that they're the right fit for you.
That's the part that's so different from med school applications. I was talking to this college student who was applying to med school, and she was trying to tell me how she was thinking through the process of how she was going to decide about all these different medical schools that she thought she was going to get into. She's like, I'm applying to 10 schools. How am I going to decide between all of them? How do you pick? And I was like, oh, honey, that is not really how it works for med school for most people. Right? I think that's just the truth. Most people are not choosing between 10 different medical schools for where to go. And that is not how this process is. This is great news. This is you are selling yourselves to the program as much as the program is selling themselves to you. And I don't want somebody that doesn't want to be in a medium-sized program outside of Chicago. If they want to be in New Jersey, I want them to go be with Ty. This is how it works, right? And so I think also doing some thinking beforehand, which is one nice thing about virtual, is you're going to have so many opportunities to hear about programs and think about what's a good fit. So you have, I'm not the FuturePedsRes commercial, but you have all these FuturePedsRes webinars. You also have opportunities. A lot of programs will be doing like virtual open houses that you can attend so that you can hear what is of interest, you know, what those programs are like. You don't need to go to all of them. They don't take attendance. It shouldn't matter for your interview offers. It's more about you gathering information, speaking to people from your school that are ahead of you, that went to these programs. Is this a good fit? I mean, that's the best thing to find out if somewhere is DO friendly, is talk to someone you know who's a DO that's there and find out if they're friendly. So I think those are the important things that you can do, is that networking.
A great question I think we got that a lot of people have is it okay to email program directors? Should we introduce ourselves? Should we make it known that we like the residency program, or is this not helpful?
I will tell you this, and I think I speak for all of the program directors on here. We absolutely positively would love to speak to everyone that sends us emails. We really, it's not a facade when we really are being sweet and nice and seem like, oh, they're so approachable. But I will tell you that as a program director, you are bombarded with so many emails a day. And I'll always warn everyone when they reach out to me, like, y'all, you may have to reach out to me a second time, just because it depends on the time. It never fails around this time of the year. People are starting to think about programs, which is great. But then what also is happening is I have 12 new residents that just entered into my hospital. I also have 9 out of the 12 residents that are applying for fellowship that wants to get letters of recommendation. And I also have this wonderful, amazing thing that I have to do as a program director called the annual program evaluation, which I say that very facetiously because it is the bane of my existence. It's the one thing that I hate as a program director, if you ask me that question. But with that being said, that's just for the month of July and August, people. So you can imagine, and this is not to say the clinical responsibilities we have. Oh, and by the way, I'm also married and I need to make sure that I give my spouse attention to, it's all of those things. So with that being said, yes, you can email us, but I won't lie to you and say that you will always get a prompt response. You can also send emails to our program coordinators as well, but they're busy. The best thing that most programs have done, and what we have started to do and really have tried to make sure this is ramped up, is we really started to increase our presence on social media. So like things like, not Snapchat, sorry, IG, not so much Twitter anymore, but with that being said, following us on social media, following our websites, we try to keep our websites up to date when there are certain things that are going on. That's also helpful to be able to engage us. But I don't know, other program directors, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I get so many emails. It's the honest truth. I think the other thing to keep in mind with emailing, so there's 2 things. One is how much should you reach out to a program? And the other is how much should that be the program director? So I think that's a 2-part question. In terms of the program director, at every program, it's not the program director that's really running intern selection and recruitment. So sometimes you might miss the person that you really need to be in touch with. Sometimes there's an APD that's really in charge of recruitment. There's an interview selection committee that might be somebody else. So most of the time on their website or like on Frida, it says who's the person to contact. And we have, for example, in our program, like a general ACHPR Peds residency email address that's where we want the communications to come, because there's a bunch of us that have access to it. And then whoever has the time can go through it. So thinking about that. I would say also thinking about how frequently you're in touch with the program is something to keep in mind. So one thing to point out is ARIS opens for us, I think, on September 27th. But PEDS has recommended that no one offer interviews before the second week of October. So don't email someone on September 30th and say that you want an interview, because they might not even have gotten to your email yet. So, I mean, gotten to your application. So that's because we're all trying to take the time. And that's just when we're starting to interview. We're trying to take the time to really look at applications. And then you have to wait a little bit of time to be offered an interview. So I usually recommend to people not really reaching out until like November 1st, if there's a program that you're really interested in and you haven't heard from yet. And then no sooner than like every 2 weeks after that, I would think. The APPD recruitment action team, along with Concept, we've also recommended to all programs that by December 1st, they let everyone know their status, so that you would know whether you were being offered an interview, not offered an interview, or placed on a wait list. So it's a 6-week time period in terms of that interview offer. The other thing I want to remind you is, which I think a lot of students don't know, is that ARIS doesn't inform us when there's something new in your application. So if we've like reviewed someone's application and then you upload something new, it doesn't tell us that. We have to manually go in to look for that. So it offers you this great opportunity to have a reason to email a program, as opposed to just saying like, hey, I'm interested. So maybe you got your level 2 score back and you want to let them know that it's there. Or maybe you did a sub-I in September, and so you don't have the letter for that until November 1st. So that's a great opportunity to email whichever email address they tell you to and say, I haven't heard from you yet. I wanted to let you know I just uploaded a letter from an inpatient pediatric sub-I that I did. If you could pass this on to the interview selection committee, I'm really eager to meet the people at your program. You know, to have those reasons like that is sometimes someone will email if maybe they got a paper published and they want us to know. We haven't talked at all about research, because in PEDS, it's not like the most important thing, but it is a factor in what we're doing, I would say. But those types of things can be helpful. Most people don't usually call, but some people do. But yeah, just to have that timeline in your mind so that you don't stress for no reason, because you really probably won't be hearing from programs like on October 1st.
Yeah, I would say to remember, so most of our coordinators run the programs in our lives and are amazing people. They have the very good memories, and they know that applicants and students that get things done on time and answer emails promptly and reply to their inquiries will also do that as residents. And so they keep track if they send you emails and you don't respond, or if you move dates multiple times, or if you forget to tell someone you're canceling or need to move something. And so be very professional with the coordinators you're interacting with in programs, because they definitely have a say in most programs about particularly professionalism issues or communication strategies, because they're used to dealing with residents throughout training. And so they have a good eye for if there may be some issues there. And so you definitely don't want that to be a reason why a program is opting not to match with you. So it always helps to communicate really well with the coordinators.
Remember, all of you on here, like your ultimate goal is that everyone should get a residency, right? And the best way you get a residency spot is if you're able to interview for one. You can't get a spot you didn't interview for. So if you know you're not going to interview at a program, please cancel your interview with enough time that one of your friends, I mean, I want to fill my spot, right? But more than that, you should want your friends to be able to get the interview. And those might be theoretical friends, like the other people. I think especially here, we've spent a lot of time, you know, now I feel this like MD guilt that I'm not a DO, but we've spent a lot of time talking about how wonderful DOs are and how you should be out there and letting people know that you're great pediatricians. the best way to do that is to enable as many of your colleagues to match as possible. And the best way to do that is to go to the interviews that you want and the interviews that you don't want, that either you don't schedule and let the program know you don't plan to schedule, so they're not holding the spot for you, or cancel when you know that you're not going to go, so that somebody else has time to move their schedule around to be able to take that interview spot.
I know that we're getting close to time. Is there just one last thing that I just wanted to say, if that's okay, which is, and hear me out, I'm going to make a plea. Everyone who is on this call who are DOs, remember that this, the gains that we have made in the world of medicine, especially in osteopathic medicine, did not come lightly, did not come easy, and there are still challenges and still roles that we have to make. It is super important to stay engaged with your osteopathic communities. It's very important to stay engaged with things like the AOA, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, and all of those groups that are really on the forefront of making sure that movements such as making sure that COMLEX scores are viewed upon as equal as USMLE scores. So please, in all means, stay engaged within those organizations as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Winters, for ending us on a very strong DO note. Thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Bodie, Dr. Winters, and Dr. Thorson. We very much appreciate your time and support. We can feel how much you support and uplift DOs. We will be transitioning into our resident-led panel. Students, if you would like to stay on, we're going to have some time where you guys can ask personal questions to residents and kind of get their perspective on things as well. We're going to put up our schedule again. Just to remind everyone, our next webinar is this upcoming Monday. It's our IMG webinar. You can use that QR code to sign up or also use the link in the chat. And we're also going to drop all of our information as far as our handles for Instagram and Twitter in the chat as well. And the last thing you'll see from us is a survey. This is an optional post survey just to let us know your thoughts, how we did, updates, maybe thoughts for next year, or also questions that you would like answered this cycle. We'll do our best to review those and make sure we can get answers for you in some form. Stay tuned for all things FuturePedsRes and hashtag PedsMatch24.